Dorothy Hale stood in the middle of the church hall and pointed her finger directly at Emily Harper's face. "We're just worried about you, dear," she said, loud enough for every woman in that room to hear. "A woman your age, still unmarried, still running around doing favors for men who will never see you as anything more than, well..." She paused, letting the silence finish the sentence for her. The other women didn't laugh. They didn't need to. Their silence said everything. Emily stood very still. Her hands were at her sides. Her jaw was tight. And then she picked up the bread knife. If this story already has your heart beating faster, stay with us. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a single chapter of stories like this one. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all truly began. The morning had started the way most mornings in Coldwater Creek started, with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of someone else's problem landing on Emily Harper's doorstep. She had been up since 4:30, not because she couldn't sleep, though sleep had been harder lately, but because the Henderson boy had come knocking at dusk the night before saying his mother's knee was bad again, and she couldn't carry the water buckets herself, and Emily had told him she would come by before sunrise. So she did. She carried the buckets. She got the fire going. She left 3 jars of the broth she had made 2 days prior sitting on the counter where Ruth Henderson would find them without having to ask. Then she went home, washed her hands, changed her dress, and made herself presentable enough for the monthly church women's gathering. She almost didn't go. Looking back on it later, she would think about that moment, standing in her small kitchen, holding her good shawl, staring at the door, and wonder what would have been different if she had simply put the shawl back on the hook and gone to check on the Walker Ranch instead. But she went, because she always went, because not going meant giving them something else to say about her. The gathering was held at Nora Simms' house that month, which meant the coffee was weak and the judgment was strong. Nora had a gift for both. She had arranged the chairs in a circle near the fireplace, and by the time Emily arrived, every seat was taken except one. The one directly in the center of the group's line of sight, positioned with the kind of precision that Emily suspected was not accidental. She sat down anyway. The conversation had already been going for some time. They were discussing the new schoolteacher, whether Mrs. Patterson's daughter was too thin, and the general moral decline of younger women who had forgotten the value of propriety. Emily stirred her coffee and said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that the less she said, the less material she gave them. But then Dorothy Hale turned the conversation the way Dorothy Hale always eventually turned every conversation. "Has anyone spoken to Emily about the Walker situation?" Dorothy asked, directing the question to the room rather than to Emily, despite Emily sitting 4 feet away. "I've been meaning to bring it up, gently, out of concern." The word concern in Dorothy Hale's mouth always meant the opposite of concern. "I'm right here, Dorothy," Emily said. Her voice was level. Dorothy looked at her as if noticing her for the first time. "Oh, I know you are, sweetheart. That's why I thought this would be a good time." She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture Emily had come to recognize as Dorothy preparing to perform charity. "We're just worried about you, dear. A woman your age, still unmarried, still running around doing favors for men who will never see you as anything more than, well..." She stopped. She didn't need to finish it. Clara Briggs looked at her coffee cup. Louise Marsh straightened her skirt. Martha Young suddenly found great interest in the curtains. 7 women in that room. Not one of them said a word. Emily set down her cup very carefully. The ceramic touched the saucer without making a sound. "Go on," Emily said. "As anything more than what, Dorothy?" Dorothy smiled in a way that never reached her eyes. "We just think you deserve better than to spend your life being useful to people who take you for granted. It's not dignified, Emily, going to Jacob Walker's ranch at all hours, caring for a man who has never once spoken of you with any intention. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand exactly what you're saying. Then perhaps you also understand that a woman in your position..." "What position is that?" Dorothy's smile tightened at the edges. "We mean that kindly." "No," Emily said, "you don't." The room went the kind of quiet that has weight to it, and then Dorothy made the mistake of continuing. "Emily, we are simply observing that you are not a young woman anymore, and that the choices you make reflect not only on yourself, but on..." Emily stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not do any of the things they would have expected her to do, any of the things that would have confirmed whatever story they had already built about her in their minds. She picked up the bread knife from the serving table beside her, the one Nora used to cut the coffee cake she always served at these gatherings, and she drove it straight into the wooden table, not hard enough to break anything, hard enough to mean something. The sound of it stopped everything. "Say it to my face," Emily said, looking directly at Dorothy. "Whatever it is you've been saying about me in every room I leave. Say it, right now, in full sentences. I'm not leaving this chair until you do." Dorothy's face had gone the color of old ash. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "That's what I thought," Emily said. She pulled the knife out of the table, set it back on the serving plate, picked up her shawl from the back of her chair, and walked out the front door without looking at anyone. She walked the 3 miles home in the cold without stopping. She didn't cry until she got to the barn. She didn't know why the barn. Maybe because it was the one place in Coldwater Creek she had always been able to breathe. The smell of hay and horses and cold morning air. No one watching, no one measuring. She sat down on the old wooden bench near the far stall, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, and she breathed. Just breathed. She wasn't embarrassed about what she'd done. That surprised her. She'd expected to feel ashamed, expected that old familiar weight to settle on her chest the moment the door closed behind her. But it didn't come. What came instead was something she hadn't felt in years, something that felt uncomfortably close to relief. "I'm done," she thought. Not as a decision, as a discovery. Like finding something she had lost so long ago she had forgotten she was looking for it. She was still sitting there when she heard footsteps in the barn doorway. She lowered her hands. Jacob Walker stood at the entrance, hat in his hand, coat dusty from the road. He was a tall man, not dramatically tall, but the kind of tall that filled a room without trying. He had a lean face and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been set against the cold since he was 12 years old. His eyes were dark brown, and most of the time difficult to read. Right now, they were not difficult to read at all. "Heard what happened at Nora Sims' place," he said. Emily almost laughed. "Of course you did. Give it another hour. It'll be in the next county." He came into the barn, moving slowly the way he always moved, like a man who had learned not to startle things. He didn't sit down. He stood about 6 feet away, which was his way of giving her space without leaving. "You all right?" he asked. "I stabbed a table," she said. "I didn't hurt anyone." "I know." A pause. "I'm not asking about the table." She looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name, something that sat somewhere between concern and something more careful. She had seen that expression before. She had spent years not knowing what to do with it. "I'm fine," she said. "Or I will be." "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "What did they say?" She told him. Not everything. She left out the parts that stung the deepest because she hadn't figured out what to do with those yet. But enough. She told him about Dorothy's smile and the folded hands, and the word concerned being used as a weapon. She told him about the silence from the other women, how that had been somehow worse than anything Dorothy actually said. Jacob listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always respected about him. Most men she knew started solving before you finished speaking. Jacob waited until you were done. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Dorothy Hale," he said, "has never done a hard thing in her life. She has a husband who adores her and a house with painted shutters and 4 children who all married well," Emily said. "By Coldwater Creek's accounting, she wins." "By Coldwater Creek's accounting," Jacob said, "I'm still my father's debt and a ranch that's one bad season from being someone else's problem. Coldwater Creek's accounting doesn't mean much." Emily looked at him. He rarely spoke about the ranch that directly. "That's the first honest thing you've said about it in 3 years," she said. He looked at the floor. "Yeah, well, how bad is it?" He was quiet long enough that she started to regret asking. Then he said, "Manageable, barely." He glanced up. "I've been restructuring some of what I owe to Hendricks, moving the timeline out. It's not catastrophic. It's a lot to carry alone." "You don't have to carry it alone," she said before she could stop herself. The words landed between them and stayed there. Jacob looked at her. Something shifted in his face, something she watched him decide to step back from, the way she had seen him step back from things before. "I know," he said carefully. She turned away first. She didn't want to watch him retreat. Ted, the thing about helping Jacob Walker for 7 years was that it had never felt like a sacrifice. That was the honest truth, the part she had never said out loud to anyone, not even to herself on the quietest nights. She had started coming to the Walker Ranch the winter after his father died. She had brought food the first time because that was what you did in Coldwater Creek when someone was grieving. You brought food. But the second time, and the third, and the 20th, those were her choices. She had chosen it. She had looked at this stubborn, closed-off, devastatingly capable man who was slowly disappearing inside his own silence, and she had decided, without anyone asking her to, that she was going to show up. She had helped him rebuild the east fence after the ice storm of '89. She had sat with the accounting books 2 winters ago when the numbers stopped adding up and helped him find 3 places where he had been quietly losing money without realizing it. She had stood beside him at his father's grave marker on the anniversary, not saying anything, just standing there, because she understood that some things didn't need words. And through all of it, she had watched him from a careful distance, keeping her feelings pressed flat the way you pressed a wildflower between book pages, to preserve it, to keep it from taking up too much space. She had told herself for 7 years that she was being practical, that she understood the situation, that Jacob Walker was a man who didn't let people in, and she was a woman who had her own life to manage, and that what existed between them was exactly what it looked like and nothing more. She had believed that story for 7 years. She didn't know when she had stopped believing it, but sitting in her barn that afternoon with Jacob standing 6 feet away being careful about the distance, she understood for the first time how much energy she had been spending to maintain a fiction, and she was tired. She was so tired of maintaining fictions. "Jacob," she said. He looked up from where he'd started examining a loose board near the stall door. A habit, she had learned, a way of giving his hand something to do when a conversation made him uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." He straightened. "All right." "I have been showing up at your ranch for 7 years," she said. "Not because I had nothing better to do. Not because we're neighbors and that's what neighbors do. I told myself that for a long time, and I think maybe I told you that story too, and maybe you believed it because it was easier for both of us if you did." She stopped, took a breath, kept going. "I showed up because I wanted to, because somewhere in those early winters, I started caring about you in a way that went past neighborly. And I never said it because I didn't know how, and because I was afraid of what it would do to what we had, and because, honestly, I wasn't sure you had it in you to hear it without running." The barn was very quiet. "I'm not telling you this because I want something from you," she continued. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm not asking you to do anything at all. After this morning, I decided I was done carrying things I shouldn't have to carry alone." She looked at him steadily. "I've been carrying this one for 7 years. I thought it was time to put it down." Jacob hadn't moved. He was standing perfectly still, the way he stood when something had hit him harder than he expected, and he was working out where to put the impact. She watched him. She had imagined this moment sometimes, in the very private corners of her mind where she allowed herself to imagine things. She had imagined him crossing the distance. She had imagined words. She had spent 7 years not quite allowing herself to finish the imagination. What she had not imagined was this: Jacob Walker pressing his hand flat against the stall post, closing his eyes, and saying nothing for such a long time that the horses shifted in their stalls. When he opened his eyes, he looked like a man who had discovered a debt he didn't know he owed. "Emily," he said. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I know," he said. He stopped, shook his head. 7 years. 7 years, she confirmed. "And you never—" "I wasn't going to chase you," she said. "I still won't." He looked at her. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before, something that sat underneath the caution, something raw and unguarded. It lasted only a second before he pulled himself back. "I don't know what to do with this," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to know right now." He nodded once, very slowly. Then he picked up his hat from where he had set it on the bench. I'll... I should check on the east field before dark, he said. The cowardice of it would have hurt more if it had been a surprise. Of course, she said. He stopped in the barn doorway. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way they sat high and tight like a man bracing for something. Emily, he said, without turning. Yes. That man who marries you, he said. Any man who... He stopped, cleared his throat. He'd be the luckiest man in Montana. She felt the words land somewhere behind her ribs. Jacob, she said softly. I wanted it to be you. He stood in the doorway for another long moment. Then he walked out into the cold, without looking back. She listened to the sound of his boots on the frozen ground growing fainter, and then she was alone in the barn with the horses and the silence and the particular weight of something that had been said and could not be unsaid. She sat there for a very long time. She didn't cry again. She had already decided she was done carrying things quietly. What happened next? Whatever Jacob Walker did with what she had given him, that was his to carry now. She had put it down. And for the first time in 7 years, her hands felt almost free. He didn't come back the next day. Emily had not expected him to. That was what she told herself when she woke up the following morning and went through her routine, stoking the fire, heating the water, feeding the 2 chickens she kept in the side yard, without looking out the window toward the road that ran past her property and curved northeast toward the Walker Ranch. She told herself she had not expected anything, and mostly she believed it. What she hadn't expected was how loud the silence would be. She had lived alone for 4 years since her mother's health had declined to the point where Emily moved back into the family home to care for her. And then since her mother had passed and left Emily the small house and a modest piece of land that was too rocky to farm and too exposed to be worth much by Coldwater Creek standards. She was used to silence. She had built an entire life inside it. But this silence had a different texture. It had the shape of something waiting. She spent the morning doing what she always did when her mind was too full. She worked. She patched the section of fence along the north side of the property that had been leaning since the last hard wind. She reorganized the dry goods shelf in the kitchen. She went through her mother's winter blankets and separated the ones that could still be mended from the ones that had gone past saving. She worked until her hands ached and her back was stiff, and the light outside had shifted from morning gray to the flat white of a cold Montana afternoon. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. The thing she kept coming back to, the thing she couldn't organize or patch or separate into piles, was the look on Jacob's face in the barn doorway. Not the words he said. The look just before the words, when his face had been open for exactly 1 second before he pulled the shutters down. She had spent 7 years watching Jacob Walker manage his expressions the way a careful man manages a fire, keeping it contained, useful, under control. She knew his face well enough to read the moments when the management slipped. It had slipped for 1 second. She didn't know what to do with what she had seen there. She was still sitting at the table when she heard the knock at the door. It was not Jacob. She knew that before she even stood up, because Jacob Walker had a specific knock, 3 times, evenly spaced, like a man who had decided to knock and was going to do it correctly. This knock was lighter, uncertain. She opened the door. Ruth Henderson stood on her porch, wrapped in a heavy coat that was a size too large, probably her late husband's. She was 63 years old and had the kind of face that had been pretty once and had traded pretty for something more durable. She was holding a jar of preserves and looking at Emily with an expression Emily couldn't immediately place. "Ruth," Emily said, "how's the knee?" "Better, thanks to you." Ruth held out the preserves. "Blackberry, from last summer. I've been meaning to bring them." Emily took the jar. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't." Ruth hesitated on the doorstep, which was unlike her. Ruth Henderson was not a woman who hesitated. "I heard what happened at Nora Sims." Emily held the door open wider. "Come in out of the cold." Ruth came in and sat at the kitchen table without being asked, the way only people who have known you long enough feel entitled to do. Emily put the kettle on. For a moment, neither of them said anything, which, with Ruth, was always more comfortable than it had any right to be. "Dorothy Hale is a small woman," Ruth said finally. "I don't mean her size, I mean her, the inside of her." Emily didn't answer. She watched the kettle. What you did, Ruth continued, with the knife. I know half the town is calling it an episode. Clara Briggs told her husband you had a breakdown. Louise Marsh is worried you've been living alone too long. A pause. I thought it was the sanest thing anyone in that room has done in about 15 years. Emily looked at her. I'm serious, Ruth said. That woman has been taking pieces out of you for as long as I can remember, and she's always dressed it up as something she was doing for your benefit. What you did was tell the truth about what was actually happening. People around here aren't used to that. She folded her hands on the table. Doesn't mean they won't punish you for it. They've been punishing me for things I didn't even do, Emily said. At least this time I earned it. Ruth let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. Fair enough. The kettle started to whistle. Emily poured the water, brought 2 cups to the table, and sat down across from Ruth. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the loose hinge on the shutter Emily had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. Can I ask you something? Ruth said. You're going to anyway. Ruth nodded, conceding the point. Jacob Walker came into town this morning, went to the hardware store, then to Hendrick's office. Didn't stop to talk to anyone, which is normal for him. But he looked, she searched for the word, unsettled. For Jacob, that's like anyone else walking around with their hair on fire. Emily wrapped both hands around her cup. I'm not asking you to tell me anything, Ruth said carefully. I just want to know if you're all right. The actual answer, not the one you give people when you don't want them to worry. Emily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because Ruth was the kind of woman who deserved a serious answer. I told him the truth yesterday, she said, about how I feel, about how long I felt it. Ruth was quiet for a moment. How did he take it? He said I'd make any man lucky. Emily's voice came out flatter than she intended. And then he left. Ruth made a sound low in her throat. Not unkind. More like someone who had seen this particular play before and recognized the act. That man, she said, has been building walls since he was 19 years old. Some people build them to keep things out. Jacob builds them to keep himself in. He's afraid if he steps outside of them, everything he's managed to hold together will... She made a small gesture with her hand. Scatter. I know, Emily said. I've known that about him for years. Then you know the problem isn't how he feels about you. Emily looked up. Ruth held her gaze. The problem is that he feels it. That's what's got him unsettled. A man like Jacob can manage not feeling things. He's been doing it his whole life. He doesn't know what to do when the feeling's already there, and he can't make it go away by working harder. She picked up her cup. Give him time. I'm not waiting on him, Emily said, firmly. That's not... I told him the truth because I needed to say it, not because I was expecting something in return. I'm not going to sit here watching the road. Good, Ruth said simply. Don't. She took a sip. Just don't close the door either. Emily didn't answer that. They drank their tea while the wind worked at the shutter, and after a while Ruth put on her coat and said she ought to get back before dark, and Emily thanked her for the preserves, and they said goodbye the way women of a certain age say goodbye in small towns. Briefly, without drama, both of them knowing they'd be back at the other's table again soon enough. After Ruth left, Emily stood at the window for a moment looking out at the road. She was not watching for anyone. She told herself that clearly and directly. Then she went and fixed the shutter. 3 days passed. On the first day, Emily went about her life. She delivered medicine to old Mr. Caulfield on the far side of town, whose daughter had sent it from Billings but who couldn't make the walk to collect it himself. She spent 2 hours helping the school teacher, a young woman named Miss Waverly, who had arrived in September and was still finding her footing, sort through the collection of donated books that had come in from a church in Helena. She mended her mother's good blankets, the ones worth saving. She did not think about Jacob Walker any more than was reasonable, which meant she thought about him several times an hour, but kept it from interrupting her work. On the second day, she thought she saw him on the main street. It turned out to be a stranger, a cattle buyer, passing through. She kept walking without breaking her stride and was unreasonably irritated with herself for the way her chest had jumped. On the third day, Dorothy Hale stopped her outside the general store. Emily saw her coming and had exactly 2 seconds to decide whether to cross the street. She didn't. She kept walking on the same side, and she did not slow down. And when Dorothy stepped slightly into her path with that particular smile arranged carefully on her face, Emily stopped and looked at her and waited. "Emily," Dorothy's voice was warm in the way that things are warm when they've been deliberately heated. "I've been hoping to run into you. I've been worried." "I heard," Emily said. "You can stop. I just think the other day got a little out of hand. I never intended—" "Dorothy," Emily kept her voice even. Not cold, just clear. "I know exactly what you intended, and I know you know I know, so let's not spend each other's time on this." Dorothy's smile didn't waver, but something behind it did. "I was simply—" "You were doing what you always do," Emily said. "You were measuring me by a standard you made up to make yourself feel safer, and then dressing it up as kindness." She paused. "I've let that go on for a long time because it was easier. I'm not going to let it go on anymore. Not because I'm angry with you. I'm not particularly, but because I don't have the patience for it, and I think we'll both be happier if we're honest about that." Dorothy stared at her. Emily nodded once, the way you nod at the end of a practical conversation, and walked into the general store. Her hands were shaking slightly when she picked up the flowers she came for. Not from anger. From the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from doing something overdue. Like finally moving a piece of furniture that had been in the wrong place so long it had left a mark on the floor. Tom Briggs, who was behind the counter and had definitely heard the whole exchange through the open door, busied himself with the price ledger and said nothing. Emily appreciated that about Tom Briggs. He had the good sense to know when not to talk. "Just the flour today, Tom," she said. "Of course, Emily," he said, and wrote it down. It was on the 4th day that Jacob came. She was in the barn again. She seemed to be spending more time in the barn lately, which she recognized as a form of hiding that she couldn't quite bring herself to stop. When she heard his horse on the path outside, she recognized the sound. 7 years of knowing someone teaches you their rhythms without meaning to. She didn't go out to meet him. He came in. He was carrying something, a coil of good rope, the kind she had mentioned needing 3 weeks ago when the old rope on the well bucket had finally given out. He set it down near the door with a carefulness that suggested he had thought about what to do with his hands before he came in. "I fixed the east fence," he said. Emily looked at him. "That's yours to fix." "I know." He didn't move from near the door. "I also talked to Hendricks about renegotiating the 3rd year of the payment schedule. The way you suggested 2 years ago. I kept thinking it wasn't the right time. Turns out the right time was 2 years ago." He said it without irony, just the flat acknowledgement of a man admitting he'd been wrong about something specific. "How did Hendricks take it?" "Better than I expected. He's not a bad man, Hendricks. He operates on assumptions. When I showed up with the actual numbers and a different proposal, he listened. A beat. It's not fixed, but it's better." "Good," she said. "That's good, Jacob." He nodded. He looked at the rope. He looked at the far wall of the barn. He looked at her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "I can imagine. I don't—" He stopped. Started again. "I'm not good at this. I want to be clear about that up front. I am not good at this." Emily sat down on the bench. "At what specifically?" He made a short, frustrated gesture. "At saying what's actually going on. Inside. I know how to fix things. I know how to work. I know how to carry things by myself and not ask for help and get through hard seasons." He paused. "I'm not sure I know how to do the other thing." "What other thing?" He looked at her directly. "The thing where you tell someone what they mean to you before it's too late." The barn was quiet. One of the horses shifted, and the sound of its hooves against the straw was very loud for a second. "I've been telling myself for 7 years," Jacob said slowly, "that I didn't have anything to offer you. That the ranch was too uncertain. That a man who's managing debt and a bad legacy and more problems than he can count in a day isn't a man who has the right to ask someone like you to factor him into things." He looked at the floor. "I told myself I was being practical. That I was protecting you from a situation you didn't need. You were protecting yourself, Emily said. Not unkindly, just accurately. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. I was. I know, she said. I've known that too. I wasn't waiting for you to be fixed, Jacob. I never thought you needed to be fixed. I know that now. He looked up. I didn't know it 4 days ago. Or, I knew it, but I didn't let myself believe it. There's a difference. She watched him. He looked tired. Not the bone-deep tired of hard physical work, the kind she had seen on him plenty of times after a bad season. This was the tiredness of someone who had been fighting something internal and had finally, grudgingly, stopped. What are you telling me? She asked. He took a breath. I'm telling you that what you said in this barn 4 days ago has been living in my chest like a coal since you said it, and I have tried to work it out and sleep it off and talk myself down from it, and none of it worked. He took a step toward her, just one. I'm telling you that 7 years ago, when you walked into my kitchen after my father's funeral with a pot of soup, and you sat at the table and you didn't try to make me feel better, and you didn't talk about the funeral, and you just sat there like someone who was going to stay. I noticed. I noticed who you were. I just didn't know what to do about it. Emily felt something shift in her chest. She pressed her feet flat against the barn floor and kept her breathing steady. And I need you to know, he continued, that when I said what I said in the doorway, that any man who married you would be lucky, I meant it. Every word. He stopped, and for a moment the control slipped again, just for a second, and she could see how much the next part cost him. I said it like it was someone else's story, because that was easier than saying what I actually meant. Which was what? She asked quietly. He looked at her. Which was that I wanted it to be me, he said. I just didn't know if I had the right. The silence that followed was the kind that isn't empty. It had weight and warmth and the particular density of something that had been a long time arriving. Emily didn't move toward him. She didn't reach for him or say something to make it easier or fill the space with comfort. She had put down the thing she was carrying 4 days ago. What happened next was his to pick up or leave. After a long moment, Jacob crossed the rest of the distance between them. He sat down on the other end of the bench. Not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she could have reached out and touched his arm without fully extending her reach. I don't know how to do this, he said again. But this time it sounded different, less like a warning and more like a man standing at the edge of something he intended to try anyway. Nobody knows how to do this, Emily said. People just do it. Were you scared? He asked. When you told me? 4 days ago. She considered lying. She didn't. Terrified, she said. I didn't show it because I'd made my peace with whatever happened. But yes, I was terrified. He nodded slowly, like a man filing something away. How did you decide to say it anyway? She thought about Dorothy Hale's smile, about the bread knife in the table, about the 7 years of carefully maintained fiction and how much energy it had cost her. I got tired, she said, of carrying things that were supposed to be too heavy to carry out loud. I decided that whatever came after was better than another 7 years of the same. Jacob was quiet for a moment. He turned the hat in his hands twice around, the way he did when he was thinking hard. I can't promise I'll be easy, he said. I haven't been asking for easy. I have a ranch that's 1 bad year from trouble and a reputation in this town for being closed off and a habit of working instead of talking when things get hard. I know all of that, she said. I've known it for 7 years. I'm not confused about who you are, Jacob. He looked at her. Something in his face settled. Not resolved, but settled, the way a field settles after the wind dies down. Still marked, but still. All right, he said. It was not a grand declaration. It was not the kind of thing people wrote in letters or remembered for poetry. It was 2 words from a man who had spent his entire adult life not saying the important things, and it landed with exactly the weight of that. All right, Emily said back. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Somewhere above the barn, a loose piece of the roof was talking to the weather. Jacob stood up and looked toward the sound. That's going to give you trouble. I know, Emily said. I've been meaning to fix it. I can take a look? She stood up too. I know you can. They walked out of the barn together into the gray Montana afternoon, not side by side quite yet. There was still a foot of careful distance between them, the distance of people who have admitted something true and are still adjusting to what the truth changes, but together, moving in the same direction. Above them, the piece of roofing knocked against itself in the wind, and Jacob tilted his head back to look at it with the focused, practical eye of a man who has already started solving the problem. Emily stood beside him and looked up at the same piece of loose tin. She thought about the 7 years behind her. She thought about Ruth Henderson's words, "Don't close the door either." She thought about the cold Jacob said had been living in his chest for 4 days, and she thought about how she had not known until he said it that she had been carrying the same thing, only she had been calling it by a different name for so long she had almost forgotten what it actually was. She did not think about what came next. Not yet. There would be time for that. For now there was just this, the two of them standing in the cold afternoon light, looking up at something that needed fixing, both of them knowing they were going to try. That was enough. For today, it was exactly enough. Jacob fixed the roof that afternoon. It took him the better part of 2 hours, working in the cold with his coat off because he always ran warm when he was working with his hands. Emily brought him coffee at the halfway point and set it on the fence post nearest the ladder without saying anything, and he picked it up without stopping to thank her, which was somehow exactly right. The way two people behave when they are past the formality of thanking each other for small things and not yet sure what to call what they have instead. When he came down from the roof, he drank the last cold inch of coffee, looked up at his work, and said, "That'll hold through spring if you keep the snow cleared from that corner." "I know how to clear snow," Emily said. "I know you do." He handed back the cup. His fingers were red from the cold. "I'll come by Saturday to check the fence line on your north side. It looked soft in 2 places when I rode in." She looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "I want to." It was the first time she had heard him say those 3 words about something that wasn't work. She filed it away without comment. He left before dark. She stood on the porch and watched him ride out, and she did not tell herself she wasn't watching. That night she slept better than she had in 2 weeks. The days that followed had a different quality than the days before, not dramatically different. Coldwater Creek did not deal in drama except behind closed doors, but different in the way a room feels different when someone has moved the furniture back to where it belongs. Small adjustments, subtle realignments. Jacob came on Saturday and walked the north fence line. He found 3 soft posts, not 2, and spent the morning resetting them while Emily worked on her side of the property. They talked across the fence the way people talk when they are working. Practical sentences, fragments, nothing that required sitting still. But there was an ease to it that had not been there 2 weeks before, or rather an ease that had always been there but had been carrying a hidden weight. The weight was gone now, or most of it. He came back the following Wednesday with information about a livestock supplier who had undercut the standard price by 8 cents per unit, which he thought might interest her since she had mentioned in October that she was thinking about expanding her small flock of chickens in the spring. She had mentioned it once, in passing, and he had remembered it across 4 months. "You remembered that," she said. He looked mildly puzzled. "Why wouldn't I?" She didn't have a good answer for that, so she didn't give one. In town, people noticed. Coldwater Creek was not a large town, and Jacob Walker coming and going from Emily Harper's property twice in 1 week was the kind of information that moved faster than weather. Dorothy Hale made a point of looking the other direction on the main street when Jacob and Emily passed within 20 feet of each other outside the general store, which was its own kind of announcement. Clara Briggs told Louise Marsh, who told Martha Young, who told anyone who would listen, that she had always thought there was something between those two. Emily heard all of this secondhand and let it pass through without catching on anything. What she kept instead, what she turned over in her mind in the evenings when the house was quiet and she was sitting at the kitchen table with whatever mending needed doing, was something much smaller and more difficult to explain. It was the way Jacob had looked at her across the fence on Saturday morning, just once, when he thought she wasn't looking. A quick look, open and unguarded, that had lasted less than a second before he pulled it back. She knew that look now. She knew it was real. That was enough to get her through the quiet evenings. Mom. 3 weeks after the afternoon in the barn, 2 things happened on the same day. which was the kind of coincidence that doesn't feel like coincidence at the time. The first thing was that Frank Donovan came into Coldwater Creek. Frank Donovan was not from the area. He was a land buyer from Billings, or that was how he introduced himself, though his way of operating suggested that buying land was more of a hobby than a profession, and that his real talent was acquiring distressed property from people who didn't have enough leverage to negotiate. He was 45, well-dressed in the way that reads as expensive from a distance and cheaply manufactured up close, and he had a handshake that was slightly too firm in the way that men use when they are trying to establish dominance in the first 3 seconds of a conversation. He came to see Jacob. Emily didn't know this until later. She found out from Tom Briggs at the general store, who had seen Donovan's wagon pass through heading east toward the Walker Ranch, and who mentioned it with the careful neutrality of someone conveying information they think might be important. "Hendricks sent him," Tom said, writing figures in his ledger. "Far as I can tell." Emily went still. "Hendricks sent a buyer to Jacob's ranch?" "That's what I'm given to understand." Tom looked up briefly. "Thought you might want to know." She walked to the Walker Ranch. She had not planned to. She had been on her way to Miss Waverly's to drop off a set of reference books the schoolteacher had borrowed from the Billings library collection that Emily had been managing informally for years. The Walker Ranch was not on the way. She changed direction anyway. She arrived to find Jacob and Donovan standing in the yard in front of the house. Jacob's arms were crossed. His face was the particular kind of flat that meant he was working very hard to keep it flat. Donovan was talking. He had the unhurried confidence of a man who believed that every conversation he entered was one he was already winning. "Mr. Walker, I understand the attachment," Donovan was saying, as Emily tied her horse to the post. Neither man acknowledged her approach, though Jacob's eyes tracked to her for 1 second. "But the attachment doesn't change the numbers. The renegotiated payment schedule Hendricks agreed to still leaves you with 4 years of obligations on land that's producing below its potential. I'm offering you a clean exit." "A clean exit," Jacob repeated. His voice had no expression in it whatsoever. "Fair market value, cash, within 30 days. You walk away without the weight of this place around your neck. Find something smaller. Something more manageable for one man." Donovan smiled. It was the smile of a man who had made this speech many times. "There's no shame in it." "I built this fence," Jacob said. Donovan blinked. "I'm sorry?" "This fence." Jacob uncrossed his arms and put one hand on the top rail of the fence nearest them. "I built it when I was 16. My father showed me how to set the posts, and I did it wrong the first time, and he made me pull them all out and do it again. I've repaired it 3 times since. I know every section of it." He looked at Donovan without raising his voice. "My father is buried on this land. I am not selling it." Donovan's smile didn't entirely leave, but it recalibrated. "I understand the emotional—" "I don't think you do," Jacob said. "And I think we're done here." Donovan glanced at Emily for the first time, with the passing assessment of a man who categorizes people quickly and doesn't revisit his conclusions. Then he looked back at Jacob. "Hendricks will be in contact." "He knows where to find me," Jacob said. Donovan went to his wagon without any further conversation. Jacob watched him go. He did not move until the wagon had rounded the bend and the sound of the wheels had faded into the dry air. Emily stood beside him. "Hendricks sent him?" she said. "Apparently my renegotiation proposal made him nervous." Jacob's jaw was set. He wanted to know if there was an easier way out for him. "By taking your land." "At fair market value," Jacob said, and the edge under the words was unmistakable. Emily looked at the fence, the one Jacob had built at 16, pulled out wrong, and done again. She thought about the conversation in the barn. The coal, he said, had been living in his chest. The way he had said, "I just didn't know if I had the right." "He's going to try again," she said. "I know." "Then we need to make sure the numbers are tighter than he expects." She turned to look at Jacob directly. "Can I see the books?" He looked at her. "Emily, I helped you find the bleeding 2 years ago," she said. "I know this ranch's finances almost as well as you do. If Hendricks is going to push, you need to be able to push back with something more than principle." She kept her voice practical. "Let me help." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded and walked toward the house. she followed. What? They spent 3 hours at the kitchen table with his ledgers. The kitchen at the Walker Ranch was nothing like Emily's kitchen. Hers was organized the way her mother had organized it, and she had maintained everything with a place, everything in the place. Jacob's kitchen had the comfortable disorder of a man who lived alone and used the space for function rather than form. There were papers on one end of the table that had been there long enough to develop their own geography. The coffee tin was on the wrong shelf. The chairs did not match. Emily found herself oddly comfortable in it. She went through the ledgers with the methodical attention she brought to anything that involved numbers, which had always been one of her quieter strengths, the ability to look at figures without the emotional noise that made other people misread them. Jacob sat across from her and answered her questions when she had them, and did not try to manage her conclusions. Here, she said eventually, turning the ledger toward him and pointing to a column. This is where you're losing more than you think. The arrangement with Cassidy's feed supplier, you're paying for consistency that you don't actually need in the winter quarter. If you shift to the Garfield supplier from September through February and keep Cassidy for the spring and summer, you save, she did the arithmetic in her head, roughly $64 a year. That's not nothing. Jacob leaned over to look at the numbers. He was close enough that she could hear him breathe. I've been using Cassidy since my father. I know, but your father was feeding more head. She tapped the column. You restructured the herd 3 years ago. The contract didn't restructure with it. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way he did when he was recalibrating. What else? The Hendricks payment, the 3rd year, the one you renegotiated. You got the timeline extended, but you didn't renegotiate the interest on the extended portion. That's going to compound against you. She looked up. You need to go back to Hendricks and get that fixed. Take the numbers. Show him the projection. He's a practical man, you said so yourself. Give him the practical case. He just sent a buyer to try to take my ranch. That's because he's nervous, Emily said. Nervous people do things to manage their anxiety, not because they're your enemy. Show him the numbers, show him you're solid, and the anxiety goes away. She paused. You told me he listened when you showed up with facts. Go back with more facts. Jacob looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face had the quality of a man revising a story he had told himself. You'd have made a hell of a ranch manager, he said. I'd have made a hell of a lot of things, she said. That's not the point. He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile she had seen on him in weeks. Not the polite social expression he wore in town, but the real one. The one that happened before he could organize his face. It transformed him. It always had. No, he said. I suppose it's not. They kept working until the light outside had gone fully dark and the cold had settled hard against the windows. Emily realized at some point that she had forgotten entirely about Miss Waverly's reference books, which were still in her saddlebag. She would have to make a separate trip tomorrow. She did not mind. When she finally closed the last ledger and stretched her hands, Jacob got up and put the kettle on without asking. He moved around his own kitchen with a specific kind of unconscious ease, and she watched him without being obvious about it, or not very obvious. What are you thinking? He said, with his back to her. I'm thinking the ranch is salvageable, she said. Clearly, the bones are good, the problems are solvable. You just need to... She stopped. He turned around. Need to what? Stop trying to solve all of them at once, she said. You carry everything at the same weight. It's like watching someone try to carry 10 buckets by grabbing all the handles at once. The load doesn't change. You just make it harder for yourself. He was quiet, looking at her. That's not just about the ranch, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. He set the cups down. He sat down across from her again, not at the same formal distance as when they were working through the books, but closer. The table between them felt different now. Not a working surface, but just a table, just two people sitting in a kitchen in the dark. I owe you something, he said. You don't owe me anything. I do. He looked at his hands on the table. I've been letting you show up for me for 7 years without ever asking you what you needed. I told myself you were capable, and you didn't ask for help, and that meant you didn't need any. He looked up. That was a convenient story. Emily looked at him steadily. What do you need? He asked, directly. The way she had asked him that day with the books 2 years ago, and the question had the same quality as hers. Practical on the surface, and underneath it something much more serious. She thought about it. Actually thought about it, not the polite automatic response. I need people to stop talking about me like I'm a problem to be solved, she said. I need to be in a room sometimes and have what I say matter because of what it is, not in spite of what I look like or how old I am or whether I have a husband. She paused. And I need the person who's closest to me to not go silent on the important things. I can handle a lot. I can't handle silence. Jacob nodded, very slowly. I'm not good at not being silent, he said. I know, I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm asking you to try. He looked at her. Then he did something she had not expected. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not dramatically, not with any kind of performance. Just set his hand over hers on the table, the way you make contact with something you are afraid of losing. I'll try, he said. She turned her hand over under his. They sat like that for a moment without speaking, which was exactly right. Then the kettle started screaming and Jacob stood up to get it, and Emily pulled her hand back and straightened the ledger in front of her, and both of them pretended the moment had been a perfectly ordinary moment, which was the only sensible way to treat it. Ish said. 2 days later, the sky changed. Emily noticed it first in the morning. The air had a particular quality to it that she associated with very bad weather. Not cold exactly, but dry in a way that was different from ordinary winter dry. The light was wrong, too flat, too even. She stood on her porch and looked toward the horizon, and there was nothing visible, yet, just the ordinary sky. But the ordinary sky felt like it was waiting. She dismissed it and went about her morning. By midday she could smell it, smoke. Not the close domestic smoke of cook fires. Something wider, something that was coming from multiple directions at once, carried on a wind that had shifted twice in an hour. She went up to the high ground north of her property, a rocky rise she used to go up as a girl when she wanted to see far. She had not been up there in years. Her knees reminded her of this on the way up. From the rise, she could see 3 separate columns of smoke to the southwest. One was thin, and the other 2 were not. The wind was moving northeast, which meant it was moving toward town. She came down from the rise faster than she went up and saddled her horse in 4 minutes flat. The first person she told was Tom Briggs, because Tom Briggs had the loudest voice in Coldwater Creek and no compunction about using it. She rode in, told him what she had seen, and was back on her horse before he had finished the first sentence of his response. She sent word to Jacob via the Henderson boy who was standing outside the livery. Not because she needed Jacob specifically, but because the Walker Ranch had the most organized set of tools and the most experienced hands in the area. Then she went to find Ruth Henderson because Ruth Henderson had the medical knowledge and the practical sense to set up a care point before anyone had thought to ask for one. The town did not immediately understand what was happening. That was the terrifying thing. Coldwater Creek had not had a wildfire move this direction in 11 years, and 11 years was long enough for people to stop treating the possibility as real. Emily watched the awareness arrive on people's faces in waves as she rode back down the main street, shouting for attention. First the polite confusion, then the squinting toward the southwest, then the smell reaching them, and after the smell, the thin haze that was already beginning to soften the hard edges of the horizon. Then the fear. We need to move the Caulfield family first, Emily said, stopping her horse in the middle of the street where a cluster of people had formed. They're furthest southwest, and they're the oldest. Henderson boy, she looked at him. Can you ride to them? Yes, ma'am. Go now. Tell them to take nothing that can't fit in 20 minutes. Ride back ahead of them so you know what you're dealing with on the road. She looked at the cluster. We need the schoolhouse opened as a shelter. Miss Waverly, the young schoolteacher, was standing near the door of the post office with her hand pressed to her mouth. Miss Waverly, can you do that? The teacher blinked. Then she straightened. Yes, I can do that. Good. Blankets, water, anything warm from the supply room. You know what's in there. I know what's in there, she confirmed. Dorothy Hale was standing at the edge of the group. Her face was white. She was looking at the horizon, and for the first time in Emily's memory, she looked genuinely uncertain. Stripped of the performance, stripped of the careful arrangement, just a frightened woman. Dorothy, Emily said. Dorothy looked at her. Your kitchen has the biggest stove on this street. I need you to start water and keep it going. Anyone who comes in needing warmth, you take them." She held Dorothy's gaze. "Can you do that?" A long pause. Dorothy Hale swallowed. "Yes," she said quietly. "I can do that." "Good." She turned her horse and rode east toward the cluster of smaller homesteads on the edge of town, the ones that most people forgot about until they needed something. She did not look back to see if people were following her directions. She had said what needed saying. Either they would do it or they wouldn't. She could not carry that too. Jacob arrived 40 minutes later with 2 of his ranch hands and a wagon loaded with water barrels and shovels. He found Emily on the south edge of town directing a line of men who were cutting a fire break through the dry brush between the town and the approaching front. He pulled up beside her. He looked at the smoke, which was considerably larger and closer than it had been an hour ago, and then he looked at her. "Tell me where you need us," he said. She pointed. "West Anchor on the fire break. If the line holds, the wind carries it past the Henderson property, and we lose the field but not the buildings. If the line doesn't hold—" "It'll hold," he said. "Don't promise me that," she said. "Just go work it." He went. She kept moving. She pulled 2 men off the fire break who were working inefficiently, standing too close together, duplicating effort, and repositioned them. She walked the supply line from the wagon to the break and found 3 places where the chain was too slow and reorganized the handoffs. She sent the older men back and put the younger ones at the front where the work was hardest, which meant having a brief but pointed argument with Carl Sims, who was 67 and believed his age made him indispensable at the front line. "Carl," she said, "you are worth more to this town healthy than heroic. Get back to the wagon." Carl opened his mouth. "Now," she said. He went. The fire break held for 2 hours. It held because the line was straight and the cut was deep enough and the wind did not shift again, which was partly luck and partly the specific location Emily had chosen based on the way she had seen the wind move in that corridor in every hard season for the last 15 years of walking that ground. When the front finally moved past, not gone, but redirected enough, the exhausted line of men stood and watched it carry east through the open field, burning what could be burned and leaving the buildings alone. The silence that followed was the particular silence of people who have been genuinely afraid and are now, cautiously, beginning to believe they might be all right. Jacob came back to where Emily was standing. He was dark with ash across one shoulder and his hat was gone. She didn't know when he had lost his hat. He stood beside her and looked at the field. "You chose the right line," he said. "I knew the terrain," she said. "You knew more than the terrain." He looked at her. She was equally dirty, she knew, with a cut on her left hand from a piece of wire she had moved without gloves and ash in her hair. She did not particularly care. "You ran this," he said. "All of it. You organized 30 people in 20 minutes. Someone had to." "Emily." He stopped. He looked at her with the open, unguarded look she had been collecting in small moments for weeks now, but this was not a small moment and he was not pulling it back. "I have been watching you for 7 years," he said, "and I thought I knew who you were. I didn't know half of it." She looked at him. Around them, people were beginning to move again, checking buildings, embracing each other, starting the slow process of understanding what had been lost and what had not. Dorothy Hale was walking toward the schoolhouse with a blanket over her arm. Carl Sims was sitting on the back of Jacob's wagon, breathing hard, accepting a cup of water from Miss Waverly, who had appeared with a bucket and a calm efficiency that suggested the crisis had done something to her too. "I have been trying," Emily said quietly, "for a very long time to be seen." Jacob nodded. He reached up and pulled a piece of ash from her hair with 2 fingers. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. "I see you," he said. "I should have said it before now. I see you, Emily." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "I know you do." Above them, the smoke was thinning. The horizon, which had been an ugly orange-gray for 3 hours, was beginning to clear. Coldwater Creek was still standing. The morning after the fire, Coldwater Creek looked like a town that had been shaken hard and set back down slightly crooked. The buildings were standing. That was the first thing people confirmed when the light came back, walking the streets in the early gray, checking corners and roof lines and the faces of their neighbors with the particular relief of people who had genuinely not been certain. The Henderson field was gone. A quarter-mile of fencing along the Sims property had burned down to the posts. Old Caulfield's woodpile, which he had spent October building, was ash. But the houses stood. The schoolhouse stood. The general store, the livery, the small post office with its crooked sign that nobody had ever gotten around to straightening, all of it stood. Tom Briggs opened the store an hour earlier than usual and didn't charge for the coffee. Emily knew this because she was already there when he unlocked the door, having not slept more than 2 hours. She had gone home after dark, cleaned the cut on her hand, changed her clothes, and lain in bed staring at the ceiling with the kind of wired exhaustion that doesn't permit sleep but also doesn't permit useful thought. At 4 a.m, she gave up, put the kettle on, and by 5 she was on her porch watching the sky get light. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been through a hard day and a harder night. Her hair was not where she had put it. The cut on her left hand had stiffened overnight, and pulling on her coat sleeve had reopened it slightly. She had eaten half a biscuit and called it breakfast. She went to the general store because she needed to know what the town was assessing in the morning light, and Tom Briggs always knew before anyone else. Henderson's east barn took some heat, but the walls held, Tom said, pouring her coffee without asking. Sims is already out rebuilding the fence line, which is a very Carl Sims thing to do before the sun's properly up. He paused. Caulfield's going to need wood before the next cold snap. I'll organize a collection, Emily said. Tom looked at her. Emily, you organized a fire break yesterday with 30 untrained people in 20 minutes. You are allowed to sleep first. I'll sleep when Caulfield has wood, she said. Tom made the sound of a man who knew better than to argue. He wrote something in his ledger. Jacob Walker's hand stayed through the night watching the east edge, he said, without looking up. Jacob himself didn't leave until about 2 a.m, came back at first light. Emily wrapped both hands around her cup and said nothing. He asked after you, Tom said, still not looking up. Before he rode out last night, asked if anyone had seen you get home safely. She drank her coffee. That's all I'm going to say about it, Tom said. Good, she said. The town meeting happened that afternoon, called by Mayor Aldrich, who was a decent enough man but who had a habit of arriving after the crisis and speaking with the authority of someone who had managed it. He stood at the front of the meeting hall and talked about community resilience and the importance of preparedness, and several people nodded, and Emily sat in the third row and kept her expression neutral. Then Ruth Henderson stood up. Ruth Henderson did not typically speak at town meetings. She had the specific authority of a woman who had lived in Coldwater Creek her entire life and buried a husband there and raised children there and earned, through sheer accumulated presence, the right to be listened to. She used that right sparingly, which made it mean something when she used it. I want to say something, Ruth said, about what actually happened yesterday. Aldrich gestured for her to proceed with the ease of a man who believed he was still managing the room. Yesterday morning, this town had no plan, Ruth said. I want to be honest about that. We had no organized response. We had no clear chain of information. What we had was a fire coming at us from 3 directions and 30 people standing in the street not knowing which way to move. She paused. She did not look at Emily, which Emily suspected was deliberate. What changed that was one person. One person who had been paying attention to this land and this town long enough to know what to do and had the clarity to say it out loud when the rest of us were still trying to understand the situation. The room was very quiet. That person, Ruth said, is Emily Harper. Emily felt the shift in the room before she saw it, the way the air changes when collective attention moves. She did not look around. She kept her eyes on Ruth. I've lived here 40 years, Ruth continued, and I've watched this town decide over and over what kind of woman Emily Harper is, what she's worth, what she deserves. She said it without heat, just the flat, durable weight of fact. I'd like to suggest that yesterday the town found out. She sat back down. The silence held for another moment. Then Carl Sims, who was sitting near the back with a bandage on his right hand from the previous day's work, said, She told me to get off the front line and I didn't want to hear it, but she was right. He said it the way Carl said most things, bluntly, without decorating it. Cost me some pride. Probably saved me something more important. A few people laughed, the short, released kind of laugh. Mayor Aldrich, with the flexibility of a politician, immediately folded Ruth's observation into the rest of his remarks as though he had planned to make it himself. Emily let him. It didn't matter who got the credit in the formal accounting. What mattered was the room, and what the room now understood. She looked at her hands in her lap. The cut on her left hand had a clean bandage on it now, white against the redness around the edges. She thought about the 7 years of women's gatherings, and the carefully positioned empty chair and Dorothy Hale's folded hands. She thought about the bread knife in the table and the walk home in the cold in the barn. She thought, so this is what it feels like. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt quieter than that. More like the feeling of having put something down that you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. Dorothy Hale found her outside after the meeting. Emily saw her coming, and this time she did not calculate anything. She just stopped and waited. Dorothy looked different than she had yesterday on the street, different even from the frightened woman at the edge of the group when the smoke was building on the horizon. She looked like someone who had slept badly and thought too much and arrived at something she didn't entirely know what to do with. I kept the stove going until after midnight, Dorothy said. 11 people came through, families from the South End. She said it without any of the usual arrangement. No performance, just words. That was good work, Emily said. Dorothy looked at her directly. She seemed to be building towards something and not finding the right architecture for it. I owe you an apology, she finally said. For a long time. Not just the gathering, for a long time. Emily looked at her. Dorothy stopped. She pressed her lips together. It was easier to measure you by what you didn't have than to look at what you did. I know that's not an excuse. I just want to be honest about what it was. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about what to do with this, turned it over the way you turn over a stone to see what's living under it. I know, she said. I've known why for a long time. I didn't like it, but I understood it. Dorothy blinked. You understood it? People measure others by what they lack when they're afraid of being measured by the same standard. Emily kept her voice even. I have a lot of things you don't, Dorothy. Independence, a set of skills the town actually needed yesterday, a life I built on my own terms. She paused. Those things made you uncomfortable because they suggested a different way of being a woman than the one you'd chosen. It was easier to call me pitiable than to sit with that. Dorothy said nothing for a long moment. She looked somewhere past Emily's shoulder. That's uncomfortably accurate, she said finally. I know. Another silence. The kind that's doing work. I'm not asking us to be friends, Emily said. I'm not sure that's what either of us needs, but I'd like to stop being each other's problem. Dorothy let out a short breath. Yes, she said. I think I'd like that too. It was not a warm ending. It was not the kind of reconciliation that involved embracing or tears. It was two practical women agreeing on a new arrangement, and Emily found that she preferred that version to the dramatic alternative. Jacob came to her house that evening. He knocked the way he always knocked, 3 times, evenly spaced. She opened the door and he was standing on her porch with his hat in his hand and a cloth-covered dish that turned out to contain, when she lifted the edge of the cloth, a surprisingly competent roast chicken and some bread that he admitted, when she raised an eyebrow, he had bought from the bakery rather than made himself. I'm not much of a baker, he said. I know, she said. Come in. He came in. She set the table and they ate without the formality that the situation might have suggested. Practically, the way 2 people eat who are hungry and comfortable enough with each other not to perform the meal. He had a graze along his left forearm from the firebreak work that he had not mentioned and had clearly not properly treated, and Emily got up midway through eating, found her medical kit, and cleaned it without asking his permission. He let her do it without protest, which surprised her. You'd have argued about this 2 months ago, she said, tying off the bandage. Probably, he said. What changed? He thought about it. I got tired of the argument. She sat back down. She picked up her fork. That's the most self-aware thing you've ever said. Don't get used to it, he said. But the corner of his mouth moved. After the dishes were cleared, he helped without being asked, which was new. They sat at the kitchen table with the remaining coffee and the comfortable weight of people who have been through something hard together and come out the other side knowing each other differently. "Donovan's not going to stop," Jacob said. Emily had been thinking the same thing. "No, Hendricks is nervous, and nervous men keep pushing until you give them a reason not to. I went back through the numbers the way you suggested. The Garfield supplier change, the interest renegotiation." He paused. "If I implement both, and the next 2 seasons are average, not good, just average, the ranch clears the debt in 3 years instead of 6. That's what the numbers showed me too. I have an appointment with Hendricks Thursday morning." He looked at her across the table. "I'd like you to come." She looked at him. "To a financial meeting. You know the numbers better than I do, and you—" He stopped, tried again. "You don't get intimidated by men like Hendricks. I've watched you talk to difficult people this week, and you stay clearer than I do. I get angry. Anger makes me stupid in negotiation." Emily considered this. It was a remarkably clear-eyed assessment of his own limitation. "You're asking me to help you negotiate your own ranch's finances," she said. "I'm asking you to come with me," he said. There was a distinction in the words that she registered. "All right," she said. He nodded. He looked at his coffee cup for a moment. Then he looked up. "Emily, what Ruth Henderson said today at the meeting, you heard. I heard, and she was right, but—" He set the cup down. He seemed to be navigating towards something with the same careful effort he'd shown in the barn, the same willingness to try even when the words didn't come easily. "I've been thinking about what you said, about needing to be in a room and have what you say matter, about not being reduced." She waited. "I owe you more than letting you help me," he said. "I mean, when Donovan came and talked to me in the yard, the way he looked at you when you rode up, like you weren't a factor in anything." His voice had something in it she recognized. Not anger exactly, something lower and steadier than anger. "I should have said something then. I didn't. I was focused on Donovan, and I let that pass, and I shouldn't have." Emily looked at him. "I didn't need you to fight that for me." "I know you didn't need it," he said. "That's not the point. The point is that I was right there and I said nothing, and that's me defaulting to the old pattern. The one where I carry my own things and let other things go unremarked because addressing them requires a kind of attention I haven't been good at." He held her gaze. "I don't want to keep doing that." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "That's all? What else do you want me to say?" He thought about it. "I expected you to, I don't know, make more of it. You recognized a mistake and named it specifically and said you wanted to change," she said. "That's what I asked for. Making more of it would just be punishing you for something you've already addressed." She picked up her cup. "I'm not interested in punishing you, Jacob." He looked at her with that open expression again, the one that lasted longer now, before he thought to manage it. "You're—" He stopped. "I'm what?" "You're different from what I expected," he said. "From what people are." "I've had a long time to figure out what's worth spending energy on," she said. "Drama isn't." She paused. "Most of the time." "Most of the time," he agreed, and this time the corner of his mouth moved far enough to qualify as an actual smile. Thursday morning, they rode to Hendrick's office together. It was the first time they had been seen traveling somewhere together with a clear purpose, and Emily was aware of this in the same way she was aware of the temperature or the direction of the wind, as relevant information, not cause for anxiety. 2 people on the road to a meeting. She had decided she was done adjusting her life around the town's interpretation of it. If Jacob was aware of the same thing, he didn't show it. He rode beside her and talked about the East Field and whether he should try winter wheat this year or hold off. And she told him what she thought, and they disagreed about the timing and argued about it mildly for 2 miles until she made a point about the soil drainage that he could not find a counter to. "You should have been a rancher," he said. "I should have been a lot of things," she said. "We've had this conversation." "We have," he said. "I like it better every time." She did not respond to that, but she did stop arguing about the winter wheat. Hendrick's office was in a narrow building next to the assay office, 2 rooms that smelled of paper and old wood and the particular mustiness of money being counted carefully. Warren Hendricks was a man in his mid-50s who wore his pragmatism on the outside. Plain clothes, plain speech, eyes that moved to the numbers before they moved to your face. He looked at Emily when they came in with the polite confusion of a man recalibrating a meeting he thought he had planned. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Hendricks," she said. She sat down in one of the chairs across from his desk with the ease of someone who has every right to be in the room. Hendricks looked at Jacob. "Emily has been helping me review the ranch finances," Jacob said. He sat down beside her. "She knows the numbers." Hendricks considered this for a moment. Then he opened his ledger and they began. Emily let Jacob lead for the first 15 minutes. He had prepared better than she expected, had the numbers organized, spoke to the revised timeline with confidence, laid out the Garfield supplier change, and the projected savings with the specificity that Hendricks respected. She watched Hendricks' face as Jacob spoke, reading the responses the way she read weather, the slight tightening around his eyes when he was skeptical, the small nod when a number landed right. When Jacob got to the interest on the extended payment timeline, Hendricks started to redirect. A gentle, practiced redirection, the kind that sounds like agreement and is actually evasion. Emily spoke. "The interest on the extended portion compounds at the current rate through year 4, she said. Mr. Walker renegotiated the timeline in good faith. Renegotiating the interest is a reasonable companion to that." She placed the projection sheet on the desk in front of Hendricks. "These are the figures. At the current interest rate, the ranch clears debt in year 6. At a modified rate, year 4. For Mr. Hendricks, the difference is 2 years of a safe, secured investment. For Mr. Walker, it's the difference between a ranch that's managing its obligations and one that's perpetually vulnerable to outside pressure." She said the last 3 words with the same level tone she had used throughout, and she watched Hendoven register them, because they both knew what outside pressure meant, and who had applied it, and what the effect had been. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. He looked at the projection sheet. He picked it up. He set it down. "The modified rate would need to be fixed, not variable," he said. "That's fair," Emily said. Hendricks looked at Jacob. "Your numbers are better than they were 6 months ago." "They are," Jacob said. "I'm going to want to see the supplier transition in writing before I agree to the interest change." "I can have that by end of the week," Jacob said. Hendricks looked at the projection again. Something in his posture settled. The particular settling of a man who has found the version of events that gives him the most comfort. "I'll draw up an amendment." Jacob extended his hand across the desk. Hendricks took it. Outside, standing in front of the narrow building in the cold Thursday morning air, Jacob exhaled slowly. "That went better than I thought," he said. "That went exactly as the numbers said it would," Emily said. "Hendricks isn't sentimental. He follows the math." "You knew that." "I suspected it. There's a difference." He looked at her. The morning light was flat and bright, the specific quality of Montana autumn that made everything look slightly more real than it should. "You're not going to let me be relieved for 5 minutes, are you?" "You can be relieved," she said. "I'm just not going to pretend it was luck." He looked at her for a moment with the open expression that she had stopped being surprised by. Then he said very quietly, so that the 2 men passing on the street wouldn't catch it, "What would I do without you?" She looked at him. "You'd manage," she said. "You'd be worse at it, but you'd manage." He almost laughed. It was nearly a real one. "Emily," he said. "Jacob. I want to take you to the Harvest Festival." She looked at him. The Harvest Festival was 3 weeks away. It was the biggest public gathering in Coldwater Creek's year, the kind of event where who you arrived with and who you stood beside was noted and remembered and discussed through the winter. "You want to take me to the Harvest Festival," she said carefully. "I want to take you to the Harvest Festival," he confirmed. "Not as a neighbor, not as a friend who helped me with my books, as—" He stopped. He looked mildly frustrated with himself in the way he always did when words required more precision than came easily. "As the woman I should have been standing beside a long time ago." Emily felt the words land. She let them. "Jacob," she said, "are you asking me or telling me?" He paused. "Asking," he said. "I'm asking." She looked at him for a moment. at the jaw that had been set against the cold since he was 12 years old, at the eyes that were not difficult to read anymore, at the man who had needed 7 years to say the important thing and had spent the last weeks trying, visibly and imperfectly, to say it better. "Yes," she said. He nodded, the brief, deliberate nod of someone marking a decision. Then he said, "I also need to tell you something." "All right." "When Donovan comes back, and he will come back because men like Donovan always come back, I'm not meeting him alone." He looked at her steadily. "I want you there. Not because I need you to handle it, because I want you there. That's different." "That's very different," she said. "I know." He held her gaze. "I'm learning the difference." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she put on her gloves and turned toward the horses. "Come on," she said. "I need to get back and organize Caulfield's wood collection before the next cold front." He fell into step beside her. "You said you were going to sleep first." "I said no such thing." "You said, Jacob." "Fine." They walked back to their horses side by side, close enough that their arms nearly touched, not quite touching, which was the right distance for where they were. Not where they had been, not where they were going, but the exact honest place they occupied right now. And for the first time in a very long time, that was not a distance that felt like absence. It felt like something being carefully built, something that was taking its time, because it intended to last. 3 weeks was both a long time and not long enough. Emily did not spend those 3 weeks waiting. She organized the wood collection for Caulfield, which turned out to involve talking 12 different people into contributing and managing the delivery schedule around 3 competing priorities. She helped Miss Waverly set up a small lending system for the schoolhouse books that would keep the collection more organized than the informal arrangement Emily had been running from her own home. She walked the boundary of her property twice in 1 week, making notes about what she wanted to do in the spring. She and Jacob saw each other often, the way they had been seeing each other, practically, with purpose, the ongoing business of 2 lives that had been quietly entwining for years, and were no longer pretending otherwise. He brought the supplier transition paperwork for her to review before it went to Hendricks. She told him the second paragraph needed restructuring and was direct about why. And he disagreed, and they went back and forth about it for 20 minutes, and eventually settled on her version of the second paragraph with 2 of his changes folded in, which was not a perfect outcome for either of them and was therefore probably correct. Frank Donovan came back as predicted on a Tuesday. He came without his wagon this time, which meant he had come to talk rather than to make an offer. Or rather, he had come to make an offer he expected to be accepted through conversation rather than paperwork. Emily and Jacob met him in the yard together. Donovan registered this arrangement with a brief recalibration that he covered quickly. "Walker," he said. "Miss Harper." A pause. "I wasn't expecting—" "Miss Harper manages the ranch finances," Jacob said, simply, without explanation or justification. "Whatever you need to say, you can say to both of us." Donovan looked at Emily. She looked back at him with the same level attention she gave ledger columns. Donovan made his offer. It was slightly higher than the first one, which meant he had done his research and knew the property was worth more than he had originally proposed. Emily listened to the full offer without interrupting, then said, "That's still under market for the water access on the north section, which you know and we know, so we'll set that version aside." She named a number. That's where the conversation begins. Donovan blinked. Jacob did not blink. He stood with his arms at his sides and let Emily manage the exchange, which was its own kind of statement. Not a man hiding behind a woman, but a man who knew what he was good at and what she was good at, and had the confidence to let the right person lead. Donovan tried 3 different angles over the next 30 minutes. Emily closed each one with numbers. When it became clear that the negotiation was not going the direction Donovan had planned, he changed tactics, looked at Jacob directly, and said, "Walker, I think we'd make more progress if we—" "You'll deal with both of us, or you won't deal at all," Jacob said. His voice was quiet. It was not a threat. It was simply and completely a fact. Donovan left without a deal. Jacob and Emily stood in the yard for a moment after the sound of his horse faded. "He'll be back," Emily said. "Probably," Jacob said, "and we'll be here." She looked at him. The we had landed naturally in his sentence without effort, without the careful management she had watched him apply to everything that required openness. She noticed. She did not say she noticed. But that evening, sitting at her kitchen table in the quiet house, she thought about the word and how it had sounded in his voice, and she let herself believe for the first time without qualification that this was real, that whatever was being built was real, that she had not been wrong to put down what she was carrying and wait to see what he would do. She had not been wrong. The Harvest Festival came on a Saturday, the way it always did, with the particular energy of a town that needed something to celebrate after a hard season. Coldwater Creek set up the festival grounds the way it had for 30 years. Long tables down the center of the main street, lanterns strung between the buildings, the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat, and the sharp sweetness of the cider that old Peterson made every year from the apple trees behind his property. By mid-afternoon, the street was full, and by early evening, it was the kind of full that made the town feel, briefly, larger than it was. Emily arrived alone. She had told Jacob she would meet him there because she was not going to be the kind of woman who waited on her porch for someone to collect her. She had dressed carefully. Not elaborately, she was not an elaborate woman, but carefully. Her good wool dress, the dark blue one that her mother had made, and she had altered twice over the years to keep it fitting right. Her hair done properly, which took longer than she would admit. Her good boots, which she had polished the night before while telling herself she was not nervous. She was a little nervous. She walked into the festival grounds with her head level and her hands easy at her sides, the posture of a woman who had decided years ago that she would not make herself smaller in public spaces and had mostly kept to that decision. She said hello to Tom Briggs and his wife. She accepted a cup of Peterson's cider from the table near the entrance. She stood for a moment in the edge of the lantern light and let herself look at the town. Really look at it, the way you look at something you have complicated feelings about. Coldwater Creek had not been kind to her, on balance. Not consistently. There had been individual kindnesses. Ruth Henderson, Tom Briggs, Miss Waverly in her first months, old Caulfield, who had always called her by her name without any particular weight attached to it. But the town as a collective entity had spent most of Emily's adult life seeing her as a category rather than a person. The capable spinster, the helpful neighbor, the woman who was useful in a crisis but didn't quite fit anywhere in the social order that mattered. She looked at the street full of lanterns and people and thought, I am still here. And so is this town. And we are both apparently capable of change. It wasn't a forgiving thought exactly. It was more honest than that. Ruth Henderson found her first, as Ruth usually did. She came with 2 cups of cider and handed one to Emily even though Emily already had one, which was a Ruth Henderson form of greeting. You look good, Ruth said. Not a compliment about appearance. Ruth didn't deal in those. A statement about state of being. I feel all right, Emily said. Jacob's not here yet, Ruth said. Also not a question. I know, I came ahead. Emily sipped the cider. I wasn't going to stand on my porch waiting. Ruth made a sound that was either amusement or approval, possibly both. No, I didn't think you would. They stood together for a moment, watching the festival. Clara Briggs and her husband were arguing quietly near the dessert table about something that was clearly not about dessert. The Henderson boy was running with 2 other children in a way that guaranteed someone would end up crying before dark. Mayor Aldrich was making the rounds with the careful efficiency of a man who understood that festivals were political events as much as social ones. Dorothy Hale brought 3 pies, Ruth said. Emily looked at her. I'm not saying it means anything, Ruth said. I'm just noting it. Dorothy brings pies every year. She brought 4 last year. This year she brought 3, and they're on the table closest to the entrance, which is where the most people will walk past them. Ruth paused. I told you, I'm not saying it means anything. Emily almost smiled. How do you know how many pies she brought last year? I'm old and I pay attention, Ruth said. It's the primary advantage of my situation. Jacob arrived at 20 minutes past 6. Emily knew the moment he came in because the quality of her peripheral awareness shifted, which was embarrassing to acknowledge even privately, but was simply true. She had been talking to Miss Waverly about the book lending system, and she registered Jacob's presence at the entrance of the festival grounds before she turned to look, the way you register a change in light. He had made an effort. She could see it. He was wearing his good coat, The dark one he wore for formal occasions, which she had seen exactly 3 times, and his hat was brushed. His jaw was clean-shaved, which was not always a given. He looked like himself, not like a dressed-up version of himself, just himself with the ordinary roughness of the day attended to. He found her with his eyes almost immediately. Across 30 feet and 20 conversations, he found her. He walked toward her without stopping to talk to anyone, which in a small town was its own kind of statement. He passed Carl Sims without acknowledging Carl's greeting except for a brief nod. He passed the dessert table without looking at it. He came to where Emily was standing with Miss Waverly, and he stopped in front of her and said simply, "You're here." "I told you I would be," she said. "I know." He looked at her in the way that she had spent months learning to receive without deflecting, directly, without management. "You look—" He stopped, clearly not finding the word he wanted. "Good," he settled on. She raised an eyebrow. "Good." "I'm not—" He pressed his mouth together briefly. "I'm working on the words." "I know," she said. You look good too." Miss Waverly, who had been pretending to examine her cider cup with great attention, excused herself with the tact of a young woman who was paying closer attention than she let on. Jacob and Emily stood in the lantern light in the middle of the harvest festival, and around them the town moved and talked and ate Peterson's cider and argued about desserts. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. "I've been thinking," Jacob said. "About what?" He looked at the street, at the lanterns, at the people. "About what this town has decided about things. About what I've let stand without saying anything." He looked back at her. "I don't want to do that anymore. Tonight or after tonight?" She looked at him steadily. "What does that mean specifically?" "It means when someone talks about you in a way that isn't right, I say something." He said it without drama, the way he said the practical things, directly, as fact. "It means I stop letting proximity speak for itself, and I let people know where I stand, clearly." "And where do you stand?" she asked. He looked at her. "Right here," he said. "Next to you. That's where I stand." It was not poetry. Jacob Walker was not a poet. But she had learned across all these months that the things he said without poetry were the things he meant completely, and that meant more to her than any arrangement of beautiful words. "All right," she said. He offered her his arm, old-fashioned, formal, completely sincere. She took it. They walked into the center of the festival together, and Coldwater Creek looked, and Coldwater Creek saw, and Emily Harper kept her head level and her hands easy, and did not explain herself to anyone. Peace. The first test came within 10 minutes. It came in the form of Gerald Marsh, Louise's husband, a large man with a large opinion of himself who conducted most conversations as though they were negotiations he expected to win. He stopped them near the main table with the specific cheerfulness of someone who intends to say something unkind and is using cheerfulness as cover. "Walker," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here with company." He looked at Emily with the up-and-down assessment that men like Gerald Marsh believed was subtle. "Miss Harper, quite the week you've had. Heard you were running around telling people what to do during the fire." "I was organizing the response," Emily said. Even. Unbothered. Right, Gerald smiled. "Lucky thing Jacob here had the hands and equipment to do the real work." The sentence was designed to land a specific way, and Emily felt exactly where it was aimed. She was already forming the response in her mind when Jacob spoke. "The firebreak was Emily's plan," Jacob said. His voice was quiet, the way it always was when he was being absolutely certain. "She chose the line, she organized the crew, she repositioned the people who were working wrong. My hands and I were there because she told us where to go." He looked at Gerald without hostility and without any backing down. "You're giving the credit to the wrong person, Gerald." Gerald's smile recalibrated. "Well, it was a team effort." "It was Emily's effort," Jacob said. "Call it what it was." The silence that followed was brief but real. Gerald Marsh laughed the laugh of a man who has been outmaneuvered and is pretending he hasn't. Of course," he said, and moved along toward the cider table. Emily did not look at Jacob immediately. She looked at the lanterns overhead, at the light they made against the dark sky, and she breathed once slowly. Then she looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I told you I was going to," he said. "You did," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. He wasn't comfortable with the thanks. She could see that, the slight shift of his shoulders. He had not done it to be thanked. He had done it because it was right, and because he had decided to be the kind of man who did what was right even when it was socially inconvenient. That was the thing about Jacob Walker that had kept Emily standing beside him for 7 years. Not the fencing or the ranch or the practicality, though those were real. It was this. Underneath the walls and the silence and the years of protected distance, there was a man who knew right from wrong with the particular clarity of someone who had thought about it hard. He had just needed to learn to act on it when it cost him something. He was learning. They ate at the long table with Ruth Henderson on Emily's left, and by the arrangement of available seats, Carl Sims and his wife on Jacob's right. Carl, who had a talent for saying exactly what he thought with no decoration, looked at the two of them sitting together and said, "About time," in the same tone he would have used to remark on the weather, and then addressed himself to his plate. Jacob said, "Mind your business, Carl." "I am minding my business," Carl said. "My business is this town and the people in it, and I've been watching you two circle each other for years. About time is all I'm saying." Ruth Henderson hid whatever expression she was making behind her cider cup. Emily did not hide anything. She laughed, a real one, short and genuine, surprised out of her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed at a festival. She could not remember, if she was being honest, the last time she had laughed in public without monitoring it first. Jacob looked at her when she laughed. He had the expression of a man discovering something he wanted to see again. The dinner went on the way festival dinners go, long and loud and punctuated by the specific social comedy of a small town in a confined space. Someone spilled cider. The Henderson boy did, in fact, end up crying, though for reasons unrelated to the running. Mayor Aldrich gave a speech that was too long and not wrong, which was about as good as anyone expected. Dorothy Hale walked past their section of the table midway through the meal. She stopped. She looked at Emily. There was a moment, just a moment, of something passing across her face, something that was not the arranged expression she usually wore. Then she said quietly, directly to Emily and no one else, "The chicken pie is good this year. Third table, far end." It was nothing. It was absurdly small, but Emily understood it for what it was. Dorothy Hale's way of extending an olive branch in the only vocabulary she had currently available, and she said, "Thank you, Dorothy," and meant it without irony. Dorothy moved on. Ruth, who had witnessed this, said nothing, which was exactly right. After dinner, when the tables had been pushed to the sides and the open space in the street became what it always became on festival nights, a place for music and movement, Jacob stood up and held out his hand. Emily looked at his hand. "I don't dance very well," he said, preemptively honest. "I know," she said. "I've seen you try." "That was 12 years ago." "Some things don't change that fast." "Emily," he kept his hand out, "dance with me anyway." She took his hand. He was right that he wasn't a natural dancer. He was too deliberate about it, too aware of the mechanics, the way he was too deliberate about most things that required instinct rather than logic. He held her at a slightly formal distance for the first minute, which made the whole thing stiff and careful. "Jacob," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm thinking about it too much." "Stop thinking about it." "I don't know how to stop thinking about things." "Yes, you do," she said. "You stopped thinking when you fixed my roof. You stopped thinking when you built the fire break line. You just worked." She looked at him directly. "This is just work." He looked at her. Something in him shifted. She could feel it in the way he held her, the slight release of deliberateness. He was not suddenly graceful. He did not transform into someone he wasn't. But the stiffness went out of it, and what was left was simply two people moving together in the lantern light, imperfectly, genuinely. Around them, Coldwater Creek watched. Not all of it, not with the focused attention of a theater audience, but the way a small town watches, peripherally, constantly, filing information away. She could feel it. She had always been able to feel it. The difference was that tonight she did not adjust herself because of it. She was here. She was visible. She was exactly where she had chosen to be, with exactly the person she had chosen to be with, and the town could look and note and discuss it through the winter, and it did not change any of those facts. Jacob said, quietly, close enough that only she could hear, "They're looking." "I know," she said. "Does it bother you?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "Not tonight." He was quiet for a moment, then, "It doesn't bother me either." He said it like a small discovery, like a man finding out something about himself he hadn't confirmed before. "I thought it would. I've kept things private because I told myself it was nobody's business, but mostly it was because I didn't want to have to defend anything." He paused. "I don't feel like I'm defending anything right now." "You're not," she said. "You're just dancing." "Badly," he said. "Badly," she agreed. "But here." He almost smiled again. She was collecting them, these almost smiles, these moments when his face went unguarded. She had been collecting them for months now without quite admitting that was what she was doing. The music shifted, something slower. He adjusted and she adjusted, and they found the new rhythm without discussion, the way people do when they have been paying attention to each other long enough to anticipate. "Emily," he said. "I want to ask you something." She leaned back slightly to look at his face. He had the expression he wore when something was costing him, not in a bad way, in the way that things that matter cost. She waited. "I've been thinking about the ranch," he said. "About the next 3 years, the way the numbers look if we run it right, and I keep—" He stopped. "Every time I think about the next 3 years, you're in the picture, not as a neighbor, not as someone helping with the books, as—" He stopped again. "Jacob," she said. "Say it." He looked at her. "I want you there," he said. "Not visiting. There, I want—" He pressed his mouth together briefly, the way he did when he was making himself be exact. "I want to marry you, if you'll have me. I'm not asking you because I need help managing the finances, or because the town is watching, or because it's the festival, and it seems like the right moment. I'm asking you because I have been a fool about this for 7 years, and I would like to spend whatever years are left being less of a fool." He paused. "That's the best proposal I know how to make." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Around them the music continued. The lantern swayed slightly in the cold air. Someone laughed at the far end of the street. The town turned around them like it always had, indifferent and intimate at once. "It's not a very romantic proposal," she said. "No," he agreed. "I know." "You didn't even stop dancing." "I thought stopping would make it more— I didn't know what to do with my hands." She looked at him, at the jaw set against the cold, at the eyes that were completely, helplessly open right now in a way she knew cost him, and he was paying anyway. At the man who had needed 7 years to say the important thing and was still here, still trying, still paying the cost of openness even when it didn't come naturally. She had told herself she was not going to chase him. She had told herself she was done carrying things quietly. She had put down what she was carrying and waited, and he had picked it up, and he was still holding it. "Yes," she said. He stopped moving. "Keep dancing," she said. "People are watching." He started moving again. He was doing it even worse than before now, which she would have laughed at if she hadn't been busy managing the feeling in her chest. Not the romantic feeling of stories, but the real thing, which was warmer and more complicated and occasionally indistinguishable from the feeling of finally being able to breathe correctly after a long time of not quite getting enough air. "Yes," she said again quietly. "Jacob." "Yes." He held her a little tighter, not dramatically, just a little tighter, the way you hold something when you have been afraid of losing it and are beginning to believe you might not. Ruth Henderson saw it happen. She was standing near the cider table with her second cup of the evening, and she saw Jacob stop moving and then start again. And she saw Emily's face in the lantern light, and she did not say anything to anyone that night. She told Emily later, privately, that she had known it would go this way. "Since when?" Emily asked. Since the morning after your father died, Ruth said, when Jacob Walker rode 2 miles out of his way to make sure your firewood was stacked before the cold front came in, and you didn't know he'd done it. Emily stared at her. I thought the Henderson boy did that. The Henderson boy was 8, Ruth said. He couldn't reach the top of the stack. Emily was quiet for a moment. 7 years. 7 years, and there had been things she hadn't even known about. You could have told me, she said. You had to find out in your own time, Ruth said. Some things can't be handed to people. They have to come to them. Emily thought about the bread knife in the table, about the barn and the cold afternoon, about the ledgers and the fire break and the harvest festival lanterns, and a man holding her slightly tighter in the middle of a street full of people who had spent years looking at her wrong. That's a frustrating philosophy, she said. Most true things are, Ruth said. They married in the spring, not a large ceremony. Neither of them wanted large. They wanted what they had, something real, without performance. Ruth Henderson came. Tom Briggs and his wife came. Miss Waverly came and cried quietly into her handkerchief and apologized for it, and Emily told her there was nothing to apologize for. Carl Sims came and said, "About time," again, which was consistent if nothing else. Dorothy Hale sent a wedding gift, a set of good kitchen linens, practical and expensive. There was no note. Emily did not need one. Emily moved to the Walker Ranch in April, when the ground was beginning to soften and the first green was showing at the edges of the fields. She brought the things that mattered, her mother's good blankets, the ones she had mended, the library collection she had been managing informally for years, which now had a home in the spare room of the ranch house that would double as a proper lending point for anyone in town who needed it. Her tools, which were numerous and organized in a way that made Jacob look at them with the respectful attention of a man who recognized good equipment. She did not bring everything at once. She made 3 trips, because 3 trips was practical. On the 3rd trip, standing in the front room of the ranch house surrounded by the last of her boxes, Jacob said, "You're here." "I'm here," she said. He picked up one of the boxes and carried it to the shelf she had indicated without asking which shelf or why that one. She watched him do it and thought about the 7 years and the coal in the chest and the fence he had built at 16 and pulled out and built again. Some things, she thought, you have to do wrong before you can do them right. She had done a lot of things wrong in her life. She had stayed quiet when she should have spoken. She had made herself useful when she should have made herself known. She had carried things alone that she should have asked for help with, and she had mistaken survival for living for longer than she wanted to admit. But she had also, at 41 years old, driven a bread knife into a table in a room full of women who had decided her value and demanded that they say it to her face. She had told a closed-off, frightened man the truth about what she felt and refused to take it back or apologize for it. She had stood on a line between a fire and a town and organized the defense with 30 untrained people and held it. She had learned, late, that being useful was not the same as being valued, that showing up was not the same as being seen, that love was not a thing you earned by making yourself indispensable, but a thing you found when you were willing to be known, fully known, not the careful perform version, but the whole complicated thing, the difficult and the capable and the afraid and the tired and the strong. She had found it, later than she expected, less neatly than she would have planned. It was enough, more than enough. The ranch took 3 years, as the numbers had predicted, to clear its primary debt. It was not a smooth 3 years. There was a difficult summer in the 2nd year when the water levels in the North Creek dropped, and they had to restructure the livestock rotation, and a disagreement about the Eastfield's winter wheat that turned into 3 days of pointed silence before they sat down and worked through it with the ledger open between them. Jacob did not become easy overnight. He still retreated into work sometimes when conversations got difficult. Emily still took on too much sometimes, the old habit of useful before necessary running deep enough to surface under stress. They were not a perfect partnership. They were a real one. By the end of the 3rd year, the Walker Ranch was not just solvent. It was beginning to be something. The Garfield supplier arrangement had held and expanded. The herd had been restructured intelligently, and the quality of the stock was drawing attention from buyers who had not previously considered Coldwater Creek a serious source. Emily's informal library had become a formal one, recognized by the county and receiving a small annual allocation that she managed with the same methodical attention she gave everything. Frank Donovan did not come back a fourth time. Men like Donovan moved on when the numbers stopped working in their favor. Warren Hendricks, whose extended payment timeline had been satisfied early, 2 months early, which was the kind of detail that mattered to a man who followed the math, sent a note that was 3 sentences long and professional, and contained, in the last sentence, a single word that Emily kept. The word was impressive. She kept it because she had spent most of her life being described as capable, which was accurate but impersonal, and impressive was different. Impressive meant someone had expected less and discovered more. That was its own kind of satisfaction. Oh, the town changed. The way towns change. Slowly, incompletely, in ways you could only see if you stood back far enough. Dorothy Hale never became Emily's friend. They became something more sustainable than that. 2 women who had looked at each other clearly and decided on a workable peace. Dorothy's pies continued to appear at public events. Emily continued to say thank you without irony. The underlying truth of what had passed between them was never spoken about again, because some understandings don't require speech to hold. Carl Sims said, "About time," at the ranch's 4th-year anniversary gathering, and Jacob told him to mind his business, and Carl said he was minding his business, and Emily laughed the real laugh again, the one surprised out of her, and the sound of it carried across the yard in the warm evening air. Ruth Henderson, at 67, remained the person Emily trusted most with the things that required actual words. They drank tea together every Thursday when nothing else interfered, which was their arrangement and needed no further explanation. Miss Waverly, who had grown considerably in her position, told Emily 3 years in that she had modeled her way of managing a room on what she had watched Emily do during the fire. The calm, the directness, the ability to see what needed doing without waiting for permission to say so. Emily told her that was a generous thing to say, and Miss Waverly said it wasn't generosity, it was just what she had seen. What Emily saw, looking at Coldwater Creek in its 5th year of knowing who she was something she had not expected to see. A town that had been changed, not by a single dramatic moment, but by the accumulation of a person refusing to disappear. She had not set out to change anything. She had set out to stop carrying what was not hers to carry alone. The change had been a consequence, not a goal. She thought about that sometimes, in the evenings, sitting at the kitchen table of the ranch house with the lamp on and the ledger open and Jacob's quiet presence somewhere in the rooms behind her, the sound of his boots, the particular rhythm of a man who had finally, cautiously, let himself settle into a life that included someone else. She thought, the things that matter most are rarely the things you are aiming for. They are the things you find when you are honest about who you are and what you will and will not carry. She had carried enough for long enough. She had put it down. And everything she had now, the ranch and the books and the Thursday teas and the man whose almost smiles she had spent years collecting, was what had been waiting on the other side of that decision. It was imperfect and real and entirely, completely hers. That was enough. That was exactly enough.